everyone, welcome back. Josh Weber here with Big Red Jelly, where we help brand build and grow businesses of all shapes and sizes through effective branding, digital building, digital solutions, and strategy and support. This video, I want to cover three lessons that stood out to me in 2020 for an agency owner or a small business owner. So I hope that these could be of value to any business owner, really, and maybe in particular small business owners and those who work in agencies or in the B2B space, for example. Let's start with number one. One of the most important lessons that I learned in 2020 here at Big Red Jelly is that being busy does not always mean being productive. In fact, let me read a quote really quick that I found that I really like. It says, when we see people doing what they did last week or last month just because they did it last month and not changing it because they want to get somewhere different, that's busy. People think that it's urgent, but that's not urgent. That's not focused. That's just perpetuating what's always been done. Russell Rath, president of Cotter Consulting, to Forbes. So true. And I found myself doing a lot of that in 2020. I have a bad habit of creating a to-do list the day before, and the length of my to-do list that I was able to get done the next day. In a way, I saw that as an accomplishment, which it is to a certain extent, but over time I really started to learn being busy does not mean you're being productive, and it certainly doesn't mean you're being smart or efficient with your work. So I still have a long ways to go, but starting 2021, it's a big goal of mine to be a lot more efficient in what we're doing. I can't remember where I read this. It was probably a book or a podcast, and I apologize that I don't know exactly where, but there was a practice experiment where he invited you to write down your top 30 things you have to do the next day, which a lot of us really wouldn't have a hard time doing that, right? You've probably been down that road before. You know, you write out your 30 things you got to get done in the workday. And then he said, circle the top 3. The rest you don't need to do and you shouldn't do, is the point he tried to get across. Those are things that should be delegated. Those are things that you added because you felt like you have to. Or going back to this quote, you kind of just are doing it because, well, that's what you did last week or that's what you did last month. And so not only would you find that you're doing this, but maybe people on your team are doing this at the company you work with. Maybe they're doing something similar. I think it's a habit we need to get out of. And we see a lot of that, especially kind of in the entrepreneurial space or the startup space, where it's cool to be on the grind, right? It's cool to be grinding. It's cool to be so busy or at the office at 10 p.m. And I have to admit, for a while, I fell into that trap. It's not cool. You know, you kind of get over that eventually. And what's cool is to be efficient and productive. And it's a double whammy, I think, is what I finally learned in 2020 was, okay, if you actually focus on those top 3 tasks and you delegate the rest, not only are you more efficient, but in a bizarre way that I cannot explain, but most of the time you end up getting more done by doing less, right? You might have a 3-day weekend ahead of you or a full day off, and you say, oh man, I have so much time ahead of me, I can't even begin to imagine the amount of things I'm going to get done. And what inevitably ends up happening in those days where we have the most amount of time, we get the least amount done. But then when we have a busy day ahead of us and we're strategic with it, in a bizarre way, we get even more done in our personal lives and lives at home in those busy work days. Maybe that's just me, but I think that does apply to other people. So again, lesson number 1 that I learned, being busy does not mean being productive. Okay, lesson number 2 of 3 is that I am still learning, but I should always reserve time for long-term planning and strategy. I don't know when this lesson really hit me, but there's been this common thread that was going through my mind probably Q3 and Q4 of last year, so 2020. And going back to number 1, I have this bad habit of I've got to be doing a lot of client work. I've got to be doing this project, working on this, have my hands on this project, moving things forward, actually doing sales, actually doing digital marketing, actually doing design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I felt like I was giving to the team in that respect. When in reality, when you're in a leadership role, whatever that might be, if you're spending even a portion of your time doing that, you're doing a disservice to your team. Why? And that kind of hit me. It was an epiphany one day because they can't do, not that they can't do, but either they can't do from, they're not capable of doing some of the things that you can as a leader, or they don't have the responsibility or the access or the credibility, right, to make certain decisions. So, for example, they're not going to go and hire new people. They're not going to make adjustments to your services, your pricing, what services you offer, how you offer them. They're not going to make major changes to your processes and your branding and your marketing and your positioning and who you have on the team and your training. They're not going to do. They're going to work on the client work, which is what they're best at. And every hour that I was spending on client work was one less hour that I was spending on the business. And in that respect, I'm doing a disservice. I almost could visualize their voices or their thoughts, even though they probably weren't thinking this all the time. But, hey, Josh, we've got this. We need you to focus on what's going to take us to the next level. We need you to hire that next team member. We need you to train the team better. We need you to prepare better processes. That's what the team needed me to do. I actually blocked off some time on a weekly basis where there's nothing else that intrudes on that time. It's just for me to sit down and go over some of the big questions, right? What services are we offering? How are we offering them? What's our team look like? What's our culture look like? Big things that only, I might have control over. So that was a big one for me. I'm still making progress, obviously. Finally, number 3, managerial output and focusing on high leverage activities. One of the books that I finished in 2022 that I'm going to recommend in this video is this one here, High Output Management by Andrew S. Grove, the former chairman and CEO of Intel. I first heard about this book because there was a blog article that came out, was sent to my email. I think it was Shopify CEO who listed the top 3 books that changed his perspective on business, and he listed this book. What I like most about this is it gives real practical things you can do today, tomorrow. Super practical techniques on how to be a better manager at the end of the day. So again, high output management. In fact, I'll read a quick little excerpt right here that I really enjoy. What is a manager's output? I asked a group of middle managers just that question. I got these responses: judgments and opinions, direction, allocation of resources, mistakes detected, personnel trained and subordinates developed, courses taught, products planned, commitments negotiated. Do these things really constitute the output of a manager? I don't think so. They are instead activities or descriptions of what managers do as they try to create a final result or output. What then is a manager's output? At Intel, if she is in charge of a wafer fabrication plant, her output consists of completed high-quality, full-process silicon wafers. If he supervises a design group, his output consists of completed designs that work correctly and are ready to go into manufacturing. If a manager is the principal of a high school, her output will be trained and educated students who have either completed their schooling or are ready to move on to the next year of their studies. If a manager is a surgeon, his output is a fully recovered, healed patient. We can sum matters up with the proposition that, and here's the key, a manager's output equals the output of his organization plus the output of the neighboring organizations under his influence. Interesting a way to think about it. He kind of goes into, look, the bread and butter of any business, big, small, whatever, a successful business is built on good management, no matter what your size is. So if you can be a good manager and those immediately beneath you can be good managers, you're off to a great start. It's just a great book. I mean, he goes into some really cool stuff like meetings, the medium of managerial work, decisions, planning, today's action for tomorrow, hybrid or dual reporting, modes of control, task, relevant, maturity. And it is fascinating. So some real practical stuff that when I actually finished reading the book, I put in some of that stuff the very next day. In fact, it's kind of cool because at the end he has a little exercise where he has these really quick things you can do like this week, and he allocates points to each one, and he says try and get 100 points by the end of this week or this month, and you actually feel super motivated to go and try and do these little tasks, and when you look back you're like, oh, that actually had a really big effect. Now, when I try to allocate my time and plan out my day, I ask myself, is this a high leverage activity? Right? So, here's some examples of high leverage activities that I do a lot more now. Recording training or academy videos, I'm doing a lot of now because I record that once and it's used infinite amount of times for future team members. Implementing a process that's going to touch probably hundreds, if not thousands, of clients going forward. That's a high leverage opportunity. People like to frown on meetings a lot, but what you have to remember is that that could be, if done correctly, a high leverage opportunity. It's one to many instead of one to one, right? Or effectively training a manager or someone who's going to train another team, because you're doing a one-to-one training, but they're going to affect who knows how many in their team and then the organizations related to it. So a big lesson I learned, focusing on high leverage activities. And I really try hard to, when I find myself going down that tunnel vision road where I'm stuck too much in just the client work or the technical work, I need to take a step back and say my team needs me to focus on some of these other areas. So those are the 3 lessons I learned. Hopefully this was helpful in some regard. Stay tuned for the video next week. Thank you.